Welcome back to Disciples for Jesus. I'm Sarah, and on this channel, we explore faith in a practical way. This is part 2 of our new series of uncoding who God really is. Because we are swimming in this transaction culture every single day, we naturally project it onto God. We assume he operates the exact same machine. We think he's sitting up there with a cosmic clipboard, tracking our wins and loses, waiting for the balance to dip into the red. But when God actually describes his own character, the very first two words he uses shatter the machine. He calls himself compassionate and gracious. Today, we are diving into what those ancient words actually mean. They paint a picture of an incredibly emotional, deeply responsive God that completely just changes the way we think about the divine. When we hear the word compassion, we usually think of a polite, slightly detached pity, like seeing a sad commercial and thinking, oh, that's too bad, before switching the channel. But the ancient Hebrew word used here is rākhum, and its definition is incredibly visceral. In fact, it is the exact same root word used for a mother's womb. Think about the connection the ancient writers are making here. This isn't a theological math equation. This is maternal imagery. A mother's connection to her unborn or newborn child isn't transactional. The baby hasn't done anything to earn her love. The baby hasn't paid rent. It hasn't cleaned its room. It actually just cries and wakes her up at 3 in the morning. Yet, if that child is hurting, the mother feels a literal physical gut level ache to protect and comfort it. That is rākhum. When the biblical texts say God is compassionate, it means that when he looks at human suffering, and yes, even suffering caused by our own stupid mistakes, his immediate default reaction isn't a cold, I told you so. It is a visceral, emotional ache to rescue us. God's compassion means he is deeply emotionally moved by your pain. But emotion without action doesn't change anything. That's why the second word in God's description is gracious, or in Hebrew, chen. Now, grace is a churchy word we throw around a lot, usually defining it as unmerited favor. But let's look at how the ancient world actually pictured it. Imagine a powerful king living in a massive palace. Down in the streets is a peasant who has absolutely nothing to offer the king. No money, no political leverage, no status. But the king looks down from his balcony, sees this person, and chooses to step down into the dirt. He gives them a gift, grants them an audience, or protects them, not because the peasant earned it, but simply because the king wanted to be generous. The act of a higher status person showing completely unearned, delightful generosity to someone of lower status. That is ken. And here is the crucial nuance that flips our transactional world on its head. A gift is only a gift if it can't be bought. You cannot bargain for ken. You cannot work your way into it. It is entirely dependent on the giver's heart, not the receiver's worthiness. When you stack these two traits together, Rākhum and Ken, you get a dangerous, beautiful synergy. Compassion is the feeling, grace is the action. Compassion is God looking at our brokenness, our failures, and our pain and feeling a fierce, protective ache in his gut. Grace is God stepping down into the dirt to do something incredibly generous about it, completely free of charge. The big takeaway: God's default setting toward a broken world isn't condemnation, it's rescue. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. Hold on a second. If God is just handing out free grace and feeling all this compassion, does he even care about right and wrong? Does justice not matter? It absolutely matters. And we're going to get to how God handles justice later in this series. But notice the order. When God introduces himself, he doesn't start with his justice, he starts with his heart. He leads with the fact that he is inherently, structurally, deeply emotional and generous toward us. In a world that tells you you're only worth what you produce or that you're defined by your biggest screw up, the character of God offers a completely different reality, a space where you don't have to perform, where you are seen, felt, and met with unearned generosity. But that brings us to a massive tension. If God is so deeply compassionate and so incredibly slow to burn with anger, why does he seem so angry in certain parts of the ancient scriptures? What do we do with the stories that make him look like a God of wrath? That is exactly what we are dismantling in this next episode when we look at what it means for God to be slow to anger. If this gave you a new perspective on how to view God, do me a huge favor. Hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment below with your thoughts on Rākhum and Ken. I will see you in episode 3. Until then, walk in faith, lead with courage, and serve with love. God bless.